Hello! Welcome back! I am sorry that this video is going up late. It is not because I didn't finish reading in time, it's because I forgot what day of the week it was. And didn't start recording this until like 8 p.m. on Tuesday when this should have gone up at 3 on Tuesday. So, we're a little late. Life goes on. For the 1940s, I read sci-fi books. That was the theme of the month. Sci-fi. World War II has just ended, and the advancements in science and technology that happened during the war kinda honestly scare the shit out of people. Because up to this point, all of these advancements were only used for war. A reflection of that is science fiction, and I read a wide range of genres in science fiction. Everything from space and futuristic to dystopian, and a bunch of different stops in between. The one thing that all of these books have in common is the science is really bad for modern times. So if you're a stickler for accurate science in science fiction, you're probably not going to like any of these books. Now, these books ranged from, hey, that was really good, to holy shit, that is so bad, I'm a little bit pissed off. So, I like some of them, I didn't like some of them. That's kind of normal. That's a typical reading month. That's what happens. Let us start with 1941 and a novel by Robert Heinlein called Methuselah's Children. Now, this one was really interesting because reading this, if you would have asked me when this was written, I would have said the 1990s. It is very, very advanced for its time. It reads like a really bad, like, 1980s B-movie, like a science fiction B-movie. And that honestly kind of made it fantastic. It was one of those where it's so bad, it's good. Just general trashy space sci-fi. The theory of this book, or the plot of this book, or the science, I guess, is that somehow a group of humans have determined how to be long-lived, like Methuselah from the Bible, but they determined how to be long-lived just based on genetics. It's people marry specific people who have a history of a long life, and they keep intermarrying in these families, and then people can live to be mid to late 100s to 200s, and they stay pretty young looking most of their lives because of plastic surgery. Not genetically, it's all plastic surgery. So I don't know if you can see the characters on the cover of this book, but she's like 180 and he's like 200 something. So the plastic surgery is working out pretty good for them. These people have basically stayed hidden for most of their life, and they decide as a secret society to come out, a small group of them, and like tell the world like, hey, we exist. And then the government are like, how do you do it? Tell us your secret. And then these people start getting hunted down and prejudiced against because they're withholding the secret to long life, because no one actually believes that it's just good genetics. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Obviously they're withholding a secret. And the adventure kind of goes on through there. The cover of this book is actually like a huge spoiler for like the mid-plot of the book. The major plot of like escaping the racism happens by the middle of the book, and then there's like a whole separate plot. Like, this could have easily been 2 books, I guess is what I'm saying. Overall, it was trashy kind of good. So, not like the most well-written thing. Like I said, the science doesn't check out at all, but I enjoyed reading this like I would any sort of like trashy romance novel, even though there's not a romance in here. It's just like good, stupid fun. Next up for 1942 was my chunker of the month. This is Islandia by Austen Tappan Wright, and it's over 1,000 pages long. It was a very, very long book. This one is very unique, where it's about a utopia, and I expected the utopia to, you know, turn out bad, but this is like an honest-to-God utopia. Islandia is part of an island, a very big island. It's an entire new country found off the coast of Africa. I'm not entirely sure which coast of Africa. I think it's in the Indian Ocean. I think. But yes, an island where we know there can't actually be an island. It's very hard to picture where this island is because, like, geography doesn't allow for an entire continent to exist in the area that this is supposed to be in. Anyway, and this part of the island is like encapsulated by mountains, and so it has been protected for the Islandian society that lives there, and modern inventions are not able to come in. The overall utopian principle of this is like simplistic living. There is no sort of capitalism really in this society, and that's what makes it utopian, is because they're not a capitalistic, greedy society. There's no money, then everybody lives simply as farmers, and everybody's happy, no one's poor, no one's starving. So if you like world building, holy shit, this man did some fantastic world building. This is his only book. It was published posthumously, so his daughter found it after he had died. It's literally his only book, and I don't know that he had ever planned to publish it, but he is very good at world building. What he is not good at is romance, and huge chunks of this book are dedicated to the main character, John, and him falling in love with a bunch of different women. And John is in his late 20s, maybe early 30s, and he falls in love with women like a 14-year-old girl has crushes. It's unbearably annoying at how, like, insta love it is, and how he was like, how he's so dramatic about, my life is over because she does not return my feelings for me, and then like 2 pages later he's in love with another girl. And when you have like 1,000 pages, it's really annoying. Maybe like if that type of thing doesn't bother you, then you may like this, especially for the world building, but I was so annoyed by the love story. And even when he finally settles down with one woman, she's super annoying, where she's just like, I can't be my own woman. My only purpose in life is to love you. And it's like, that's fucking stupid. So I did not like this book only because the love story things annoyed the hell out of me, but the world building was beautiful. Overall, this didn't feel much like a science fiction to me. It felt more like fantastical realism, maybe. But I understand that it goes in the sci-fi category because it's a utopian fiction. Next up is The Glass Bead Game by Hermann Hesse, I think is how you say his name. I listened to this as an audiobook, and I don't know if it was because of the audiobook or the book itself, but I still don't really understand what's going on in this book. So this is a fictional biography about a guy named Joseph Knecht, who is one of the most famous people or practitioners of the glass bead game, which is a fictional society, I guess. It's like a fictional, learned society of men who dedicate their lives to like mathematics and language and music and history, and kind of combine all of that into one thing that they call the glass bead game. So the language of all of those things can be translated into one language, and then that's the glass bead game. So it's very intelligent and way beyond my ability to process like philosophical things. And honestly, I don't understand, if you're going to write a false biography, like, why about something so incredibly boring? So it basically goes from like him as a child. He's an orphan child. They don't know anything about his background. This is like written, I don't know, like 100 years, 50 to 100 years after he's died. So they don't know really anything about his background. And then he ends up going to the school to be one of the practitioners of the glass bead game. And basically, like, even the biography goes into, like, we can't explain to you the glass bead game because we don't really even understand it. Like, you'd have to go to school and be a practitioner of it to even begin to understand the game. So you don't really even know what the glass bead game is. You kind of only get, like, a vague sense of it. And so it goes through childhood, through school. He graduates school, gets to study. It's like free study for a couple of years. And then he's elected as the Magister Ludi, I think is what they called it, who is like the head of this society of glass bead game people. And then he is a born leader, a natural leader, and so he becomes the leader of these people. You get a couple of years of him doing this in the biography, and then he quits. He's just like, I never wanted to do this. I don't have the ambition to do this. I just want to be left alone to my own studies. And that's all I wanted to do. He wants to play music. He's a piano player. So he just wants to play music and do his own studies of like math, or music is math, or math is music, something like that. Like I said, it's confusing. So he quits, and then you follow him for a few years, and then he dies. And that's only like half the book. And then the next part of the book is like notes. And I think this is where I got confused. I actually had to go look this up at the end, or like look up like a Cliff Notes version of this to figure this out. And I think this is because the audiobook, where the audiobook doesn't really define that it's going to a new chapter or a new section. And so I didn't realize that why this kept going on. But it goes into a section where it's like after he had quit his job as Magister Ludi, he took on a student, and then there was like stories of him from that student. And then that portion apparently ended too, and then it started going into like these fables. But Joseph Knecht is the star of all these fables, but it has nothing to do with the society that we've had in the entire book so far. So I was super, super confused, but going back and reading the Cliff Notes, apparently these were writings done by Joseph Knecht, where he made himself the star of his own fables, and he always played the part of like a religious wise man. I liked the fables part of the book. The rest of it was immensely boring and very confusing. And I still, like, my point stands that I really don't understand why there is a fictional biography about such a boring thing. So that one wasn't for me. Maybe if I would have read it as a physical book, I would have done better, but I was just lost. Next up for 1944 was Sirius by Olaf Stapledon, and I thought this was going to be another Call of the Wild because it's about a dog with a human brain, but it's not actually from Sirius's point of view. This is like written by a man who had known Sirius for the end of his life, and like Sirius kind of like dictated his life story to this guy, and then this guy who's an author kind of like rewrote it. Is, I guess, another biography, but completely different format from the last book. The dog was specifically bred for intelligence, and as all of these are, the science is bad, and basically a female dog was injected with some sort of chemical while she was pregnant, and the puppies, it made their brains grow, and it had to be done to puppies in vitro so the skull could expand, and somehow that gave them human levels of intelligence, or specifically Sirius human levels of intelligence. He was the only dog to really survive. Other dogs survived, but they weren't like human smart. They were just like really, really dog smart. Sirius is the only one who actually survived, and he thinks of himself as like, he has the intelligence of a human. He can talk, read, write, do anything a human can do. And a extremely intelligent human, actually. Overall, this was extremely problematic. This sends the wrong message about handicapped people, because Sirius was a prick. Like, if he was actually a human being, he would be one of the like biggest pricks ever. And he was incapable of being all he could be because he didn't have thumbs. And that is extremely insulting to anybody who's handicapped. Because not having thumbs doesn't make you any less human. That's stupid and absurd. Like I said, he's supposed to be superhuman in intelligence, but he just comes off as a self-centered asshole with super aggressively violent tendencies. Like super aggressively violent. He attacks and kills things all the time, just throwing hissy fits. His character very, very much reminds me of those guys that you find on the internet who blame other people for their own shortcomings. Like, he is completely incapable of accepting his own faults, and it's somebody else's fault that he's like this. It's basically the guy on Twitter who says that he's entitled to have a woman. Like, he doesn't have to work for it. Women should worship at his feet. That is the character of Sirius. And it was like super, super problematic. On top of all of that, there's some really, really creepy bestiality shit going on in here with the woman that Sirius was raised with from a little girl. He was born at the same time, roughly, as the doctor's daughter, and they grew up together and like learned everything together and spent their lives together. And there's really creepy bestiality shit going on. Like, there's no actual like human animal sex, but there's a lot of if you weren't an animal, and that's it was just creepy. It was creepy, and I can't explain it any other way than it was really fucking creepy. So this one, like 2 stars. Like, I highly don't recommend this for anybody. It was problematic and creepy and just bad. It was just bad. 1945 was much better. I read George Orwell's Animal Farm, and holy shit, this book was so good. Like, I understand why teachers make people read it in high school. I was never required to read this in high school for some reason, so this is my first time reading it. The pacing's great. It was really well written. It's basically a bunch of animals who think that the farmer, who really doesn't treat them very well, he's kind of lazy, he's kind of a drunk, and they treat him kind of like a monarch, and the people rise up and revolt and form their own communism. And it plays out exactly like communism typically does, where it starts out all wonderful and everybody's equal, and then a certain group of animals, the pigs, kind of take over a leadership position, and then they keep changing the rules so they get benefits, and it's not really equal anymore, and it just kind of curves back to exactly where it started from, where now they have a dictatorship instead of a monarch, but they still have, it's still the miserable life they started out with. The animals, each group of animals kind of like represents a very stereotypical type of person that you find in a communist party. You've got the sheep, who are sheep. They just kind of do exactly what they're told and loudly chant and baa and do exactly what they're supposed to do without even thinking about it. They follow the crowd. You've got the puppies that were born after the overthrow and raised by the pigs, and they're basically like the youth, the brainwashed youth who don't really know any other way, and because their elders tell them that this is what you're supposed to do, this is the best thing ever, they kind of have this like fanatical thing. You've got the dog, or you've got one of the pigs who was kind of like at first equal in power, but eventually he was overthrown and now he is the face of the bad guys. His name is Snowball, and everything that goes wrong is not the pig's fault, it's Snowball's fault. Snowball is sabotaging us. It's either the humans or Snowball. And then there's other ones throughout there. Like overall, it's a very clear, concise, easy way to warn children, because I would say this is a young adult novel, about like the dangers of communism and how, where it sounds really, really good on paper, it doesn't ever actually end up working out that way. Next up for 1946 is a novel called Slan, and this is a novel that really tackles racism well. Slans are like superhumans. They're like X-Men mutants is how I would think best to describe them. They can read minds and have other superhuman abilities. They run really fast, super strength, healing abilities, stuff like that. And they're killed on sight, and they're identified by their hair. They've got like golden tendrils in their hair that come out of their skull and help them, and that's what reads the thoughts. So they have to like hide that part of their head. They first appeared maybe like 500 years before this book takes place, and they are now hunted on sight. There is some rumor that they steal human babies and then do experiments on them and either kill them or transform them into Slan. It's very vague on what evil things they do to babies, but that's kind of like the populace's fear, is the Slan will take your children. And this book is basically the story of two Slan children. You have Johnny, or Jommy, Jommy, and Kathleen. And Jommy was kind of sneaking through the city with his mom when he was younger. This is like the very beginning of the book. And his mom is killed, and he kind of like ends up with this old woman who uses him to steal things. And then she spends the money on alcohol and gets drunk. And then Kathleen is a captive of the state. She lives in like a luxurious captivity as kind of owned, I guess, by the ruler of this nation. And basically it kind of goes through their lives in their separate places. Obviously they're going to come together towards the end, and mostly what this is her. She doesn't really play a big part in it. She's just kind of like there. But Jami is the main focus of the book, and he is trying to discover where the other Slan are. His father has hidden a weapon that is supposed to help the Slan defeat humanity once and for all, and Jami can access it once he is 15. He's like 9 at the beginning of the book, and it's basically like his story growing up, finding the weapon that his father left, and then he has to figure out where the rest of the Slan are, because obviously they still exist, that they're in hiding, and he's trying to figure out like where the F they're hiding. This was actually a really, really fantastic book. It handles racism really well, especially with the like, why the fuck are people racist? Because the Slan aren't doing anything wrong. They're not violent. They haven't really existed for the last 500 years, yet they're hunted and killed on sight. So, really cool. Really well done. I highly recommend it. It was a very interesting, fun read. It was also pretty short, so 2 in a row that gets a high ranking from me. For 1947, I read Sinister by Vladimir Nabokov, and I believe this was the first book that he wrote in English. It was really weird. I'm not a fan of the writing style of it at all. It reads kind of like a poem, maybe, or somebody who's just learned to speak English and goes a bit too heavy with the thesaurus. There is a plot to the book, but it's maybe like 160-page book, and the plot maybe covers 20 pages of the whole story. The main character, Krug, is an important, like, professor in this nation. And at the very beginning of the book, Krug's wife dies in a hospital. I mean, like, literally first page of the book, his wife dies. And he and his son have, like, while she's in the hospital dying, there's a civil war going on, and the government is being overthrown. And he and his son are trapped in this nation after the Civil War, even though he's on the opposite side of the winning party. And the leader of this new party happens to be like who happened to have been a schoolboy with Krug, but the leader, worshipped Krug, and Krug basically bullied and hated him, and he's known as Toad because that's what Krug calls him, and Krug's the narrator of the story. If he has a real name, I don't remember what it was, but I'm gonna refer to him as Toad because that's what he's referred to in the book. Basically, Toad wants nothing but Krug's respect, and Krug is not going to give it to him. He's very, like, I don't give a shit what you think about me. I don't give a shit what you want. I don't give a shit about your government. So what happens is Krug's friends and family start to be arrested, and it's basically Toad is trying to bully Krug into writing a paper proclaiming that his government is in the right because people respect what he has to say. So a lot of the plots to get Krug to come over to the other side are very, like, sad but they're somehow written like a Monty Python skit, and it just, like, the humor of how this is told doesn't fit with, like, the weight of the situation, and it's really, really awkward to read, where people are getting murdered and killed for their political beliefs, but they're treating it like fart jokes. And like I said, that's only about like 20-30 pages of the book. The rest of it are like Krug's daydreams or dreams, and you don't really know until after you've read it that it was a dream, and the whole thing is really confusing, and just the tone's wrong. Like, the tone is so incredibly uncomfortably wrong for the events happening in the book, and I didn't like it. I just didn't like it. No. I guess I could have held it up. I do have this book. The back cover broke off, so I had to tape it back on. But yeah, it's not a long book, but man, I did not like that one. Next up is Beyond This Horizon, another Robert Heinlein book. In my notes, I wrote down that this is the Texas version of a utopia, where everybody's happy and everybody gets along and everybody has an equal amount of wealth, except for everybody carries guns and has duels randomly. So again, this is like genetic manipulation through selective breeding. Science, as always, really, really off on this one. The plot is all over the place. There's like a spy mystery in here, and then overthrowing the government, and then time travel, a love story. There's a subplot about like researching what happens after you die from a scientific standpoint. There's aliens. There's telepathy. It's super short, and it doesn't even know what the fuck it's about. I didn't like it. I honestly, I read this last week and I really don't remember what it's about, but there is a scene in here that reads very, very much like just straight sexual assault. Like, he beats up a girl and like holds her down until she agrees to kiss him and then go out with him. Like, I don't know what world you're living in, but in my world, that's sexual assault. So, not super happy with this book. Not a great book. This got 2 stars from me. It wasn't a good one. Next up for 1949 is 1984 by George Orwell. Now, this takes a different tact than pretty much every other book that I've read this month, where there is not one fucking happy thing about this book. There is no utopia that turns into a dystopia. There is no good. This is just straight depression in a novel. Basically, World War II never ended, and the government controls everything. It's 1984, and there's still a war. And everybody lives miserably. Everybody's poor. There's not enough anything to go around. Like, this is a living hellscape of a world. I've also learned by reading this that people who compare our modern society with like smartphones and like your Amazon Echo or your Google, I don't remember what it's called, like listening to your conversations is very 1984. Have never actually fucking read 1984. Like, every listening government device in this book is 8 billion times worse than what is going on in our modern society. So anybody who compares modern society to 1984, just knows the quotes from 1984 and they're taking them completely out of context. This book is actually very dismal, and it makes it very boring because Orwell takes a very, very long time building up, like, how fucking miserable everything is, and reading about people being miserable is not actually entertaining. It's good, it's important, but it's kind of a slog to read. Let's just say it's not a happy ending, and if you're looking to read Orwell, I do recommend Animal Farm over this. I still liked this, mostly because I like reading stories about people being miserable, but Animal Farm was much better paced. And the final book that I read for 1950 was iRobot by Isaac Asimov. Now, this is really more of a collection of short stories more than anything. This is the story of, or this is told by a robo-psychologist named Dr. Calvin to a reporter at the end of her life, basically. She's going into retirement, or she's been retired, and she's kind of like telling different like major events from her 50 some odd years of being a robo-psychologist for this company. Overall, the short stories are really good. They're paced really well. They're short stories. They're all like little standalone stories set in the same universe. Some of them overlap characters, some of them don't. None of them could have, or half of them really couldn't have been told by Dr. Calvin. Like, it doesn't make any sense for her to know these things, but easy to brush off. Again, the science is bad. It doesn't make sense. But all of them kind of revolve around the law of robotics, where robots have 3 laws, not rules, laws they have to live by, which they cannot let a human come to harm. I'm really bad at the laws of robotics. That's the important one. They're not supposed to let themselves come to harm. And then they're supposed to listen to what humans tell them to do. That's vague, but that's what it is. And the first one, like, trumps. So, like, if a human tells them to do something that will cause a human being harm, then the robot can't do it. Now, there was a movie called iRobot with Will Smith in it in, 2010, and there are parallels between them, like the law of robotics, but the movie really had nothing at all to do with the book. I am very disappointed that there was a book written in the 1930s with the main protagonist as a female doctor, and in 2010 they decided to write the female out of the book and replace her with a man, Will Smith's character. I believe there was a Dr. Calvin in the movie, but she was a minor character when in the book she was a major character, and that seems like a really big miss for me. Very disappointing, but mostly the movie and the book really only had like the vaguest sense to do with each other. I very much enjoyed the short stories in that, so very entertaining, very well paced, standalone, perfectly fine, separate from each other, but then all tie in. And that's it. That's all my sci-fi. We went all over the freaking place this month with sci-fi, and I ended up reading like 4 other books this month outside of that were also sci-fi. So I'm very, very sci-fied out this month. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I will have the 1950s TBR up in a week or so. Soon, TM. But make sure you follow, check that out, and I will see you next time.